think in this new world, we're being asked to think bigger than that. So thinking bigger means managing content components that could be narrative copy as a first-class object, or even data that's presenting as content. That's a whole new ballgame here.
Welcome to Real Story on MarTech, ruthless advocates for your MarTech mission, advising buyers with just the facts on stacks to get you on the right track.
All right, welcome to the Real Story on MarTech. I'm Jarrod, Gingras, Managing Director of the Real Story Group.
And I'm Tony Byrne, founder of Real Story Group.
All right, Tony, today we're going to be talking about the 4 phases of digital asset management, or DAM, one of my favorite topics, as you know.
Yeah, well, it certainly feels like we're in the golden age of content where we're all producing digital content at volumes we've never seen before. And of course, content marketing is on everyone's lips. And yet it seems like these same desires are putting pressure on enterprises to manage their content in much more sophisticated ways. And so as a result, what we're seeing is the profile of digital asset management, or DAM systems. It's rising in almost every enterprise that we encounter at Real Story Group.
Yeah, and I say at the same time, every enterprise we encounter is really at a different stage in their asset or content management journey. So what we're going to present to you today is a framework that we created at Real Story Group to help plot where you are on your journey, and maybe more importantly, where you might want to go on that journey.
So, okay, Jarrod, before we get started, you have to tell us, what is a digital asset management or DAM system? And generally speaking, what does it do?
Yeah, so a DAM system is fundamentally a system to manage content assets, which are, traditionally images, video, and audio through a life cycle. Now, I'm going to simplify here, but that life cycle can go from ingestion of assets into a system to transformation to a multitude of formats, to enrichment through metadata, to publication out into the world, to some sort of end of life like a archival or even deletion in some cases.
So it's interesting to me is that DAM technology vendors and platforms, they've been around for a pretty long time. They emerged soon after web content management systems in the early 2000s. So we're talking about more than 2 decades of history here.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that when we think back to those early web content management days when we were all building websites for the first time, and they evolved out of mostly text-based websites, and then very quickly we recognized how important images and video were to creating rich experiences. So rich media became a beast in and of itself that we needed to manage, right? It wasn't good enough to just think of it as part of a page. We need to manage rich media, and as an object themselves, and even send them down their own workflows or apply their own metadata to rich media assets. And that's where we saw this whole marketplace emerge to say, hey, we just want to tackle rich media and create a system to manage that, and then hand it off to web content management systems where appropriate.
Yeah, and then we saw all these different kind of technology variants that spun off from this market. Like you had so-called brand asset management, media asset management, video asset management, more recently marketing asset management, and so forth. Do we still really need all these different systems?
It's a bit complicated, so I'm going to say yes and no. So things like brand asset management and, basic video management, those are really just common use cases that you'll find within almost any DAM today. The exception to the rule here, I'll say, is maybe media asset management, where you're managing like long form video. That's still largely its own thing. Some DAM vendors will try to tell you that they can handle that, but due to the need for really sophisticated storage management, where you're managing proxies in a different, more cost-effective way than these large raw files, that's remained kind of its own market. And then you mentioned marketing asset management. That's certainly an interesting concept, and we'll certainly get into that a bit when we get to the 3.0 phase in our journey today.
Okay, so you came up with this framework, the 4 levels or phases of DAM, and these 4 levels, they're really, when you look at it, there are different tiers of sophistication and value. So it almost seems a bit like a maturity model.
Yeah, definitely. The reason we developed this is to really assess where someone is on their DAM journey. We get calls every day from enterprises asking for help and figuring out where they want to go, but first we need to figure out where they're at today. So this was a way for us to say, okay, this organization is a 1.0 organization or a 2.0 organization or a 3.0 organization. And then from there, once we know where they are, we can then kind of look forward and say, all right, where do you want to go? Where do you want to get to a level 4 or a level 3 or a level 2 in some cases? And it's really been a good framework to kind of help that conversation move forward.
Okay, so we'll get into the 4 levels in a minute, but first, a kind of an observation here. It seems like the 4 levels also reflect a kind of a history of the market as a whole, yeah?
Yeah, this has been kind of funny to see how it all played out. We created this framework as a way to map the customer journey, as we said, but it really does describe the evolution that this whole DAM marketplace has undergone. Like if you think back to the early days of DAM, people were saying things like SharePoint or Box.com or Dropbox were DAMs. And at some level, maybe they were, but they were really primitive. They're basically folder-based file management tools. Then about 10 to 12 years ago, there was a recognition in the marketplace that DAM was an important piece of your marketing technology stack. And then fast forward to 6 to 8 years ago, in the last 6 to 8 years, I think there's been a renewed seriousness and around creating omnichannel experiences, and enterprises are looking to see DAM's role in that conversation. And then, of course, the last few years, we're all talking about AI, and we're really ramping up our desire for speed and predictive systems. And it's really fascinating to see what this is doing to the DAM conversation as well. So yeah, totally mirrors this evolution of the marketplace, but so I think it serves multiple uses.
Okay, so let's dig into the phases one at a time. So what you were describing earlier, like Box.com, Dropbox, and such, that sounds kind of like DAM 1.0. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so first step in your DAM journey is almost always just employing some unified system to serve as a single location for an asset to reside, as I mentioned, through that life cycle, right? So if you look at a packaged digital asset management system, every digital asset management system can help you manage images, video, and audio from ingestion to publication to archive. Now, 1.0 level enterprises, have the DAM system set up. It serves as a library. It's a place where your staff can go to check in and check out assets, which, to be honest, is a significant improvement for most organizations over the uncategorized mess that you probably endured prior to putting the system in place. Now, for most organizations, DAM 1.0 library is an essential starting point, but really you've probably just created another silo of content in your enterprise. Now, it's probably better than existed before, but it's another place for you to go put things and then go get things, right? So in order to actually do things, you have to download them out of that system and then probably re-upload them somewhere else to actually do something. So it's an improvement, step in the right direction, but it's just another silo in your organization.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of this kind of pre 1.0 phenomenon of this, I think you called it an uncategorized mess. And, what's so fascinating today is that we see many large organizations or even newer, like born digital enterprises that are still trying to get, even today to that level 1. It's almost like there's a level 0 that's still reasonably prevalent out there.
There's absolutely a level 0. And, the hard truth of the matter is that many enterprises are very much at a DAM 0 point something, we'll call it, right? With assets scattered across the enterprise, whether those assets are in shared drives, the Z drive, X drive, C drive, B drive, A drive, those are very real environments that we encounter all the time. And then, there's so many assets in cloud file sharing services, whether they're sanctioned or unsanctioned, or assets that live in email boxes or in personal devices. And some are still very much an uncategorized mess. In fact, I was thinking back just yesterday, I told one of the largest brands in the world that they were a 0.8 enterprise. So I think there's some solace to be taken here. If you're just getting started on your DAM journey, you're certainly not alone. Some of the biggest companies in the world are still trying to get over the hump to even a 1.0 phase in their journey.
Yeah, okay, so that's 1.0, kind of a basic library, but of course no self-respecting digital or MarTech operation wants to stick around at phase 1. So Tell us what's in store at level 2.
Yeah. Again, a little bit more history for everyone on listening today. For years, digital asset management was either not included or marginalized in the marketing technology conversation. People viewed DAM as the tool of the creatives or the brand managers or wait for it, librarians. I think back to the conferences that we'd attend 10, 15 years ago. We go to the Henry Stewart Dam conference, and I remember being one of the only people in the room up there saying, you need to consider Dam as MarTech. And the looks I got back from those librarians in the room was quite concerning, because that wasn't their world. This was their system, and it was disconnected from everything else, and they didn't think about how they fit into the larger MarTech picture. Now, again, fast forward to today, I think we've largely gotten over that hurdle. Most enterprises recognize that DAM firmly resides in the MarTech conversation. And in fact, for most enterprises, DAM has become an anchor service in your marketing or enterprise MarTech stacks. I think those organizations truly see DAM as a critical part of the asset creation workflow. It's the repository of record for work in progress or completed assets. And we can have that discussion about, where the lines are drawn there for different organizations. But the point here is that it's integrated with upstream content creation systems and downstream systems of engagement. But a key consideration or a characteristic of a DAM 2.0 deployment is that flow of work that we're describing is one direction. It's unidirectional, right? So if you're a 2.0 organization, you're probably missing opportunities to integrate analytics in an albeit a meaningful way.
Yeah, and probably tracking too. But now we're getting into this whole conversation of integration in 2.0. And so what are some examples of systems that a DAM 2.0 needs to integrate with, like both upstream and downstream?
Yeah, so this varies from organization to organization, certainly, but the classic upstream integrations are really your creative suite, right? It's the places where your designers work, whether that's the Photoshops, the InDesigns, the video production systems, but it's where designers can retrieve design components from a DAM and then store their work products back into the DAM directly from their creative tools. Now, downstream, we're talking about, here at Real Story Group, we call these downstream systems of engagement largely. It's I like to describe it sometimes as it's where your marketer peers spend most of their days creating experiences. So if you're serving a web channel, you're probably working in a web content management tool. If you're serving an email channel, you're probably working in a marketing automation tool, or you might be working in an e-commerce tool. Or if you're serving a social environment, you're probably using social publishing tools. And if that's where you're creating experiences, that's where integration makes sense, because you want to pull or reference assets directly from a DAM, from these systems of engagement.
So if we look at this from a supplier context, in the supplier marketplace, the technology marketplace, would you say that most DAM vendors target some version of this, level 2 scenario?
Absolutely. This is where the preponderance of the marketplace is targeting. And for many enterprises, that's been okay so far. But more and more, the conversation is changing. I say, especially in this age of AI, where customers and leaders at many of the biggest enterprises want to do more. And the people working within these DAMs are finding that they're being held back by their 2.0 DAM in many cases. So we're finding that many vendors, and in turn their clients, are really stuck at this level. And let's be honest, going up to the next level is really hard for vendors and customers. So that's a consideration, but we'll certainly talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, so if we stick on this level 2 for a second, one thing that's really interesting that you're kind of really scratching at here is that DAM becomes a first-class participant in the broader, MarTech stack. But at the same time, we see a lot of implementations of DAM platforms that we even call themselves DAM 2.0 platforms, where it's really just a so-called web DAM. That is, it just manages and feeds imagery to your web properties. So, okay, fine. That's all well and good. But at that point, it's really just kind of a 1.0 DAM if it only has one destination environment.
Yeah, the web is still such a primary channel for so many organizations, and so we're seeing how dams that are sold by web CMS vendors are getting implemented in a way that is sort of a captive environment. And the one they're certainly not alone, but I'll pick on Adobe for a second. But Adobe Assets, their dam is almost always sold with an eye on this web channel, and it's really kind of a waste if we're being real here.
And of course, we always keep it real. But let's now move on to what I think is really one of the more exciting developments. It's a very nascent development, but it's one of the more exciting developments across all of MarTech, and that is really DAM 3.0. And, Jarrod, we've been talking about this for maybe, 6-7 years, but it's really just in the past few years that we've seen some serious enterprise adoption of this, mostly, to be sure, around large enterprises and some of the more advanced, born digital firms, but it's actually happening.
That's right. And it's such a big shift that it's evolving every day, and it really represents a new marketplace that's kind of spun off of largely the DAM marketplace, and we're calling this phenomenon in this new marketplace omnichannel content platforms, or OCPs.
Okay, so I got to interrupt you right there. So we all have to learn a new 3-letter acronym, OCP?
Yeah, I think we do, and really because like we talked about earlier, DAM was always about images, video, and some audio management, right? And I think in this new world, we're being asked to think bigger than that. So thinking bigger means managing content components that could be narrative copy as a first-class object, or even data that's presenting as content. That's a whole new ballgame here.
Yeah. So what's driving this evolution?
So a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest one, from my perspective, is organizations getting frustrated with disjointed experiences across a multitude of channels. For a long time, we've had a finite number of channels that we were managing. So this multi-channel ambition wasn't that hard to satisfy, at least in some rudimentary ways. But as more channels enter our world, organizations are saying we can't have disjointed experiences, from web to social to AI prompts to third-party experiences. We need to make sure our content is consistent across the board, and this is requiring people to think differently. And certainly AI has provided some fuel to the fire here. And we found to really take advantage of AI, you're going to need a truly enterprise content store, and that's what we're talking about doing appropriately in a Phase 3.0 organization.
This is also fascinating to me because, watching the web CMS space, you had these so-called headless web CMS vendors. So a headless web CMS vendor basically just manages the back end, the content repository of your CMS platform. And these headless CMS vendors, they're still running around saying that, they can do this, that they can play this role in your architecture as like this core content repository for structured, reusable content. But the reality is they can't. First of all, they only have your web content. And second of all, they don't treat image and media assets and data effectively enough, the way a true omni-channel content platform, or an OCP, needs to do.
Yeah, that's right. And I know you're picking on the headless CMS vendors here as trying to tell this story and solve this problem that they recognize as a big issue. But it's not just the CMS vendors too. We see this story being told by product information management vendors or PIM vendors. We see it from CRM vendors and content distribution vendors. Everyone is kind of recognizing this as a massive foundational opportunity to be your omnichannel content platform, and they're all trying to come to the party here. But really, the big reason that we think DAM vendors have a head start, or at least the higher end of the DAM marketplace, is they don't have notions of compound assets. Think about assets within assets, or a good example is like the title, the narrative, the image assets that make up a single block of content, like an email block. They also can't handle tracking asset derivatives, which is really important in a multi-channel world.
Okay, so what's a derivative asset?
So basically, a derivative assets are variants of an original or core asset. Now, there are lots of types of derivative assets here, but some typical examples are maybe translated versions of the same asset for a bunch of different regional uses, or even channel-specific variants. So let's take an example. Like, think about, you might produce this foundational marketing video, and if that's your core asset, there might be a bunch of channel-specific derivatives, like a mid-sized clip that makes it to your website, or even a bunch of shorter social media renditions that you use on Instagram or X or whatnot.
So underneath all this, really what you're talking about is a pretty fundamental shift in information organization. You're now managing a slew of parent-child relationships, and you have a kind of a graph model for all of your assets. I mean, in techie terms, this means that your application and your repository need to be object-oriented, right?
Exactly. And that's what really separates the wheat from the chaff here in the marketplace, and really explains why there are only less than a handful of true OCPs out there today. Now, that might change. I expect it to change, but today there's only a really small handful of true OCPs that we're seeing.
Okay, so this whole conversation is super exciting, but if we think this through, it also sounds kind of challenging for MarTech and DAM leaders to pull off, especially when you start thinking about things like governance and operations. I mean, just off the top of my head, it's you really need to manage 3 or 4 key things here, right? I mean, you need to decide what content components are truly enterprise worthy that you're going to share, across channels to be managed this way, or derive across channels, right? You need an effective taxonomy to connect all these pieces and to support the kind of automation that you want at the edge within these channels. So that means in other words, the assets are smart enough to know where to go, and that means metadata, and that means a holistic taxonomy, right? You need to have systems in place to track where all those components and compound assets are being deployed, and that then takes us to this whole new world of two-way, integration like you don't see in DAM 2.0. I mean, all that's super exciting, especially the part about, you were mentioning earlier about embedding intelligence around asset performance right within the DAM. I mean, it sounds like a marketer's dream, but this DAM 3.0 thing, it still seems like a lot of sophistication, which can mean a lot of work, right?
Yes, it definitely can be a lot, but this is where we're seeing a ton of investment among some of the largest companies in the world and most sophisticated companies in the world. But just to hit on one of the points you mentioned, one of the bigger challenges that we're seeing right now is for enterprises trying to make that leap to 3.0 is how to round trip data to live side by side with the content. Like you mentioned, unlike 2.0 where it's that one directional flow of information, the 3.0 world, I think, is where analytics are round tripping back to live side by side to the content to inform future content decisions. Now, that used to be informing future decisions by a designer or a marketer or someone creating an experience. But more and more, I think that future decision might be made by a machine in an AI environment. And this has really proven the toughest nut to crack to date. But we're seeing progress be made here, both on the vendor side and the buyer side. So I think that's really why up until now, we've seen the people making most progress into a 3.0 world has really been mostly amongst the more larger forward-looking enterprises that have quite frankly experienced some unbelievable pain at the moment, trying to achieve their goals. And these are the organizations that are really looking to accelerate and scale their content operations going forward.
Okay, so give us some examples then. Who's actually doing this?
Yeah, so I think where we see a lot of investment happening is these enterprises that, they have been trying for a long time to implement true personalization or true next best action initiatives or next best experience initiatives. And they've just constantly over the years hit wall after wall after wall, because the dirty little secret is that to do those things really well, you need to feed the beast with an often unattainable amount of content. And I think people are looking to AI as an answer to this challenge, right? And but I think there's been a harsh realization that in order to fully take advantage of the AI possibilities, your content and data need to be managed in a way that aligns to what we're describing in this 3.0 world.
Yeah, and you talk about feed the beast. It's really feed the beasts when we talk about all of these different channels. And of course, there's new channels emerging even now, including, agentic consumption. And so, you have to account for all of these different channels. There's new ones that we add to our channel list every year, but you still want to have this omni-channel coherence. And, honestly, I don't know how you do that in an automated way, in a reliable way, without this kind of repository. But you mentioned this magic term AI and agentic a couple of times now. What's up with that here in the 3.0 world?
Yeah, so I think it's actually two pieces to this AI conversation. So there's embedding generative AI into workflows and post-production derivative creation. That latter piece is really huge, but the initial pilots that we're seeing are really not hitting the mark, and I think they will evolve over time. We're seeing a lot of experimentation there, but that's one big piece of this, and maybe even bigger. I think it's this DAM 3.0 serving as an authoritative enterprise repository to train your private LLM or whatever it is you're using. And it's against these curated data sets and repositories that you are going to want to train it on first. We work with a big healthcare organization that is using their scans of people to predict illnesses, before they can be diagnosed in more traditional manner. And they're looking to their Enterprise 3.0 DAM to slice and dice their massive repositories of scans. And, they want to be able to look at, gender breakdowns, age breakdowns, and also filter on really sophisticated metadata that might relate to things like preconditions or different regions of the world. And, anyways, but they're doing so much research they see AI as a way to speed up this research and so that they can do things that they've never been able to do before. But they just don't want to throw AI at a whole slew of content. They want to be able to say, go look at this slice and then this slice and compare it to this slice. And without proper management, that's impossible.
So that's so fascinating. It seems like DAM 3.0 has moved, from, it's still maybe futuristic for a lot of organizations, but it's definitely moving into reality in as much as some enterprises are doing this today. Even if it's still a bit cutting edge, but now you still have this DAM 4.0 out there. And, that suggests that this ultimate stage 4.0 is really, well, if not futuristic, then pretty forward-looking right now.
It's a bit futuristic, Tony, but, when we first released this model, let's be honest, there was three stages here. And then I started hearing rumblings about this desire for this 4.0 world from buyers of technology and enterprise leaders. But as AI continues to evolve and the possibilities of AI continue to emerge, almost every enterprise leader that we speak to, they might not be using the same words that we're using, but ultimately they're describing a 4.0 world in some respect.
Yeah, and you teased us a little bit with that big healthcare company, but just tell us a little bit. 4.0, what is it? And more importantly, why would I want to go there?
So the label what we put on 4.0 is I'm calling it a predictive content platform. And I know this isn't a perfect term, but it's the best that we can come up with at this point. But I think the next evolution is going to move beyond reactive content strategies to more proactive, intelligent experiences for prospects and customers. So a true 4.0 system is going to empower us to be able to ask our systems really complicated contextual questions and receive data-driven insights from that information that we have to enhance our decision making. I mentioned in the 3.0 world how we're round tripping data, but now that data paired with our content is really powering some proactive instances. So, I think at a very simple level, we could leverage these systems in a way where our marketers could ask a system which asset is more likely to perform best, among women in Canada, age 45 to 55, and received an informed recommendation based on advanced performance analytics. And maybe even more predictive than asking the question. Maybe the system's going to bubble this content up for us automatically before we even ask the question. I think that's really an interesting development and really where this is headed. And beyond intelligent recommendations, I think a predictive content platform will take optimization a step further. We'll be able to incorporate real-time asset testing and adaptation. So the platform can continuously evaluate performance metrics, automatically adjust content elements to maximize engagement and effectiveness. I think that's such a different way of thinking than we do today, but it's coming. And obviously, AI-driven content creation is going to enhance efficiencies by generating those personalized, high-quality assets on demand, and reduce a burden on creative teams, that are being asked today to kind of feed that beast, as we said, and create a whole slew of different variants and derivatives off of assets, which is the mundane stuff. So give AI the power to do that and create those personalized experiences to feed the beast, as we said, and at the same time maintain a really high level of customization.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What comes to mind, of course, is the intense integration and automation that's implied here, and makes me think right away. Yeah, you could really benefit from different types of AI, but also agentic AI, agents to make this all happen in a more scalable and automated way. Basically by having the agents do all the hard and messy work and connecting all these things together. But then I'm also thinking that would be much more advanced agents than we see on offer in the market today, and it would require a lot of governance and operational maturity to pull off. I mean, even we're seeing now a lot of the pilots that are trying to create these personalized derivatives and do it in an automated way for personalization. They're not always showing, a particularly, good ROI, and the agents are expensive and struggling a little bit. So, I get the vision. It feels like maybe the reality we're still kind of working towards here.
Yeah, everyone's talking about agentic, certainly, and but I really feel like the enterprises that are going to succeed the soonest with agentic are those enterprises who are really invested in getting their content stores, their dams, to at least that 3.0 level. Those are the ones that are going to make progress, soonest. But I also want to be real here and say, you can still make headway without agents. If you really lean into insights AI and predictive AI, there's still value here. And I'd argue that it's those two types of AI, insights and predictive AI, that are going to ultimately offer more value than the generative AI that it always demos so well from the vendors, and everyone gets everyone excited. It's the insights and the predictive aspects of AI that are really going to get, I think, the most value for most organizations.
Yeah, I think that's been a common theme across all of our podcasts, that insights and predictive AI are going to be more of a game changer than generative AI. It's not that generative AI is unimportant and that you shouldn't be experimenting with it. It's just, I think from a MarTech perspective, the other two types of AI are probably going to have, more weight, more impact. So anyway, we've been talking about a lot of exciting concepts, a lot of, pretty heavy duty technology as well. And I'm thinking, some of our listeners out there are probably wondering, who are the key vendors I should look at here? And what are some of the gotchas that Real Story Group would say, I should anticipate and try to overcome?
Well, we definitely have the answers to those questions, Tony. We're watching both the DAM marketplace and the OCP marketplace very closely. But I think to truly give a summary opinion here, it's going to require a much deeper conversation. So I'd invite any of our listeners, if you want answers to those questions, get a hold of us here at RSG. We're happy to delve into your situation and look at where you are at on your DAM journey and where you want to go, and we can help play matchmaker with the vendors that are out there and give you some really practical advice from those that have gone before you, and hopefully you can avoid some of those gotchas that you mentioned.
All right. Well, that seems like a good note to wrap things up on. So, Jarrod, what do we have coming up next in this podcast series?
Yeah, next time we're going to shift gears a bit, and we're going to talk about some career advice for the MarTech leader. Something that we talk a lot with our council members and our subscribers over the years. We ultimately know that these technology decisions that we're advising on are really influential in a personal career. And we have some really practical advice that we've learned over the years that we're going to share with our listeners on the next episode. In the meantime, As always, we invite you to subscribe, like, share this podcast with a friend, and share where you are at on your damn journey. Leave us a comment and tell us which phase you're at and where you're aiming to get to. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening. We appreciate the support, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you at a later time. Thanks, Tony.
See ya, Jarrod.